Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're taking a massive step back to look at the clash between the mainstream headlines you're probably reading every single day and the underlying hidden economics that are actually driving the robotaxi revolution. If you've been casually following the news, it kind of feels like the race for autonomous vehicles is just this simple numbers game, right? Like, who has the most cars driving empty on the road right now? But what if the metrics Wall Street is completely obsessing over are actually blinding us to the real race?
I mean, it's a totally valid question to ask. Are we measuring the autonomous vehicle race with the wrong yardstick? We're going to dive deep into the hidden data today to figure that out. Because when you look past all the PR and you focus strictly on the math, the entire framing of this technological arms race begins to collapse, and a very, very different picture emerges.
All right, let's get into it with Section 1, the fleet size distraction.
To understand why it's a distraction, we first have to look at what Wall Street and mainstream coverage are entirely fixated on. When you pull up the widely accepted numbers, you see Waymo operating north of 3,000 commercial driverless vehicles across cities like Phoenix, San Francisco, and LA. Almost all of these are completely driverless, though, they are overseen remotely by humans. Then you look over at Tesla. They have around 25 unsupervised robotaxis quietly operating in Texas between Austin, Dallas, and Houston. So, if you simply compare these two numbers side by side, fleet to fleet, the conclusion seems totally obvious. Waymo is winning by a massive margin, and Tesla is barely a rounding error. But is physical fleet size really the metric that decides who owns the multi-trillion-dollar autonomy market?
Okay, let's dive into this next part. Section 2, the cumulative miles advantage.
Let's pivot our focus away from the physical cars on the road for a second and look toward the actual data engine that's powering AI autonomy. 10 billion. Just let that number sink in. That is the massive number of cumulative full self-driving miles Tesla has just crossed, spanning their entire fleet going back years. When you hold that 10 billion up against a fleet of just 25 unsupervised cars, it creates instant cognitive dissonance, doesn't it? How does a company with so few unsupervised cars have literally billions of miles of data?
Well, it comes down to this direct comparison. Waymo has somewhere north of 200 million cumulative driverless miles across their entire history. Tesla has 10 billion. But here's the truly fascinating part. Both of these numbers are currently doubling roughly every 9 months. Waymo's doubling rate is incredibly impressive for sure, but Tesla's total miles are going to go from 10 billion to 20 billion in that exact same 9-month timeframe. Now, to be perfectly fair and neutral here, we absolutely have to acknowledge the nuance. This is slightly an apples to oranges comparison. Tesla's miles are largely supervised, meaning, a human is in the driver's seat ready to take over, while Waymo's are mostly unsupervised and remote monitored. But honestly, whether a human is sitting in the seat or not, the raw training data, the safety validation, the weird edge case intersections, all of that still flows directly through the architecture to train the unsupervised system.
Which brings us to Section 3, Wright's Law and autonomy.
So you might be wondering, why does this doubling rate matter so much? Aren't miles just miles? Actually, no. It comes down to Wright's Law. First observed back in 1936 by an aeronautical engineer named Theodore Wright, he basically noticed that every time the cumulative production of airplanes doubled, the cost to produce the next unit fell by a fixed percentage, usually about 15 to 20%. And this observation has held true for nearly a century across solar panels, batteries, semiconductors, the whole shebang. In the world of autonomy, the unit of production isn't just the car itself, it's the mile. Every single cumulative mile is a unit of training data and a unit of cost reduction. The system that doubles its mile count fastest gets smarter, safer, and critically, cheaper, way faster.
And this brilliantly illustrates the real-world impact of that economic law happening today. Based on Morgan Stanley's estimates, Waymo's cost per mile currently sits somewhere between $1.36 and $1.43. Meanwhile, Tesla's structural cost basis is already down to roughly 81 cents per mile. The cascading cost staircase is literally pushing down right in front of our eyes. Because Tesla's slope on the data curve is steeper by sheer volume, their costs are fundamentally lower.
To really put all of this cost debate into perspective, let's look at the number 23. A competitor in the space, Pony.ai, calculated that their robotaxi business reaches break-even at roughly 23 paid rides per vehicle per day. This sets a clear, undeniable benchmark for what these companies absolutely must achieve to actually be profitable. So the ultimate question becomes, who can get to 23 paid rides per car per day fastest? The company with higher costs and premium pricing, or the company with structurally lower costs?
Now let's look at the hardware side. Section 4, the production scale gap.
We really need to zoom out from the software and look at the physical reality of manufacturing these massive global fleets. Waymo relies on partners like Zeekr and Hyundai to build their vehicles, and combined, those contracts limit manufacturing to roughly 20,000 vehicles per year, at best right now. Tesla, on the other hand, owns its entire means of production. They already manufacture around 2 million cars a year globally. Furthermore, their new, dedicated Cybercab is FMVSS compliant right from day one. That means they aren't bound by the traditional National Highway Traffic Safety Administration cap that limits automakers to a mere 2,500 fully self-driving vehicles per year. They can scale production literally as fast as their factories allow. And you can see that ramp up happening in the commercial data. Look at this timeline. In the first quarter of 2026, Tesla reported 1.7 million paid Robotaxi miles. Now, critics rightly point out that this is tiny compared to Waymo's commercial volume. But just look at the trajectory as the unsupervised fleet rolls out. If the current growth holds, they are projected to hit north of 4 million paid miles in Q2 and potentially cross 10 million in Q3. This rapid, quarter-over-quarter compounding growth means the commercial gap is closing at an astonishing speed. Let's move to and see how this all builds up. Section 5. 3 possible futures.
When you look at the raw math of data and manufacturing scale, there are really 3 potential futures for this technological arms race. First is the fast Tesla win scenario. The doubling math holds, they reach 40 to 80 billion miles by mid-2028, costs drop to 35 cents a mile, and they scale thousands of cybercabs to become the dominant global player. Second is the slow Tesla win. The doubling rate slows down, maybe due to a regulatory wall or a tough software hurdle. The timeline stretches out by 2 to 3 years, but their sheer brute force scale still makes them the eventual winner. And the third scenario is that Waymo wins. And we have to be clear, this is a very legitimate possibility. In this scenario, Tesla's generalized AI fails to adapt to new cities without high-definition maps. Or worse, a catastrophic safety failure completely pauses their entire rollout indefinitely by regulators. In that future, Waymo's slow, expensive, and premium approach turns out to be exactly the right and safest architecture all along.
Finally, let's bring it home. Section 6. Why this matters to you.
Let's bring all these high-level corporate and AI theories directly down to your monthly budget. Right now, a typical Uber ride costs around $2 per mile. But at massive scale, ARK Invest projects that fully autonomous robotaxis will drop that cost down to roughly 25 cents per mile. Guys, we are talking about a massive order of magnitude reduction in transportation costs.
Let's apply that 25 cents a mile to the average American who drives about 13,000 miles a year. That means your entire annual transportation cost would land around $3,000 or about $250 a month. Now compare that to the average car payment, plus insurance, gas, and maintenance, which easily totals closer to $900 a month for traditional car ownership. This underlying math entirely reshapes everyday life. Actually, scratch that. It completely collapses the financial logic of owning a personal car for millions and millions of people.
The exact same exponential math that will determine the corporate winner of the autonomy race is the very math that will make life genuinely cheaper and more accessible for the average person. It changes how cities allocate parking, how older adults maintain their independence, and how families budget. So I want to leave you with this to think about. When personal transportation costs just $250 a month, what will you do with your time and your money when you literally no longer need to own a car? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and we'll catch you in the next one.